All right. Okay. So, um, our Tech-10 presentation tonight is by Ken Kraus, K6KEC. You may have heard his name call sign during some of the Western States events, the Western States endurance run. Hey Ken, can you enable this and turn off that? And I can imagine this guy running around the hills, climbing trees. I don't know what he was doing physically, but what he was doing was working on a some of the RF links for connecting people out in the middle of nowhere into the internet system for sending email. And he's going to talk a little bit about tonight what this thing is called WinLink and explain, how this thing works and what it can do. So with that, Ken, take it away.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Orion, too, to help with the slides because I've got a little hang up there. As Greg mentioned, this will be just kind of a brief overview of the modes, operation, and challenges of WinLink. And Orion, you just go to the next slide, please. WinLink is an email system that takes advantage of VHF, UHF, and HF bands. For Western states and for these running events, we use the VHF bands, and WinLink is international in its scope, although it's primarily in the United States and in Northern Europe. If you look at some of their maps, that's kind of where it's focused out of. The message, because it's using VHF and the UHF and HF bands, the messages have to stay kind of small in volume, and so for that reason we use. Hopefully, we have direct access to what's called a gateway, and a gateway is a site that has internet service. So, if you're working in the Auburn area, there's the Placer County Search and Rescue has a very good site. Joe K6SAT has a couple of really good sites, and there's others that are directly available. Those all are called gateways because they can process a message directly. If you don't have access directly to a gateway, then it goes through a digipeater. And Greg was mentioning that one of the things I did for Western States last summer was set up one of the digipeater stations up by Duncan Peak Lookout that was used by some of the more remote stations. Digipeater is simply a relay. And so a message would hit the digipeater and then get pushed on through. And last summer, Erez and I were up at Duncan Peak Lookout, and we were trying a number of different tests. And so the point being that we could hit from up at Duncan Peak, where you have a big line of sight out there, you can go up to maybe as much as 100 miles. And we were hitting Mount Vaca from up there, which is like 100 miles, as well as a lot of stations that are in the Sacramento area. So you want to hit the next slide, Orion? This presentation, as I mentioned, we're going to focus mostly on the VHF and HF modes. There is another mode called Telnet, and that's kind of cheating because that's really just using Wi-Fi, but it's a great tool to help you understand if your system is set up correctly. And you can also send messages that way. The main location for all things WinLink is their winlink.org site. And one of the things I've found as I've become more and more involved with it is that the WinLink programs group has their own Groups.io site, and it's incredibly helpful for people that are getting started. And even if you go to just the WinLink main page, you'll see a number of slides there that Oliver, K6OLI, is putting together right now, and you can go back and watch some of his presentations. So rather than try to show you a setup, there's so much of this information that's available on the WinLink site that I'll just refer you to that. So, Orion, why don't you go ahead and hit the next slide? And so the first question is probably, well, why do we need WinLink? And the main thing is that it replaces voice traffic with digital communication. In the case of Western states, we're pushing, there's 370 runners that come through these aid stations that are all reporting progress, and there's 12 to 15 of them. So that was coming into somewhere between 4,400 and 5,000 pieces of data that had been being sent by voice. And you can imagine over time what that means as runners spread out. I had over a decade of experience out on the trail as the safety team coordinator, and I would have an HD on my shoulder listening to some of this traffic, and it was just nonstop. You couldn't hear anything other than just these runner reports, even to the exclusion of being able to get on the radio and request assistance for runners that were down, or for other types of communication that should be more higher priority than what we're hearing. It also standardizes reporting, so with the use of templates that are available. The templates allow us to have 15 aid stations that are all reporting progress. Because you're using templates, everybody's reporting this information in the same manner. So when it hits net control down in Auburn, it looks the same, feels the same every single time. There's no question about, well, Robinson Flat is sending information in one manner, Last Chance or the river crossing are sending it differently. Everybody reports the same because of these templates. It also creates a much higher level of accuracy of reporting because the data is then only touched one time, and that's when it's input by the WinLink operator. After that, it's strictly cut and paste and goes directly into the social media and running databases that are really, really important and then pushed out to the general public. It also changed how fast we were getting this information out. In the past, runner information would be sent out sporadically as the voice comms were working. Sometimes a runner would come through an aid station. It'd be 45 minutes to an hour before it was reported to public. And so people were wondering, well, where's my runners? And they get panicky because they don't have any information. Through the use of WinLink, we've been able to accelerate that to the point that our goal is to have everybody's progress reported within just 10 minutes of clearing an aid station. And it's been extremely, extremely helpful. Next slide, please. And so as mentioned, the first couple of places where we're using it recreationally, where the club is using it is Western States and also the Tevis Cup, which is essentially the horse riding event on the same course. It's also being widely adopted by other ultramarathon and endurance events each year. Personally, I've worked down in San Diego where they were trying to adopt it a couple of years ago, and I'll get into one of the issues they encountered. I know it's being used at the Angeles Crest 100. I was talking to Oliver, K6OLI, that I mentioned. He's involved in that organization. I'm on my way to Utah next month to work at the Bear 100, where it'll be used there as well. And that event will have some of its own challenges. It's being adopted in large numbers, more and more each year. And then next slide, please. So we've been talking mostly about kind of how I got involved with it, which was through running and when I was asked to take a WinLink slot a couple of years ago. But it's also being used a lot in emergency communications. And on the slides here, you see just a number of different places where it's been used. I was talking with some people that were involved with the Puerto Rico incident, the big hurricanes there a couple of years ago. And my interest was how would they be reporting that stuff? And that's where the HF component of it comes in. Obviously, you're not using VHF to send messages from Puerto Rico back to the mainland, but through the use of templates and the HF technology or the HF bands, they were able to use Red Cross forms and fill out information, everything from just personnel reports to supply requests and other things, and use those HF bands to send that all the way back to the United States and the mainland and be able to progress those types of requests. More recently, there's a hurricane template that's been released, and people are being able to report in real time what's going on in some of these locations as not only earthquakes, but the hurricanes too. The hurricane form is something that is just playing out in Hawaii, I think it was last month, and they were getting on-ground reports at a much higher rate than what they had been. So next slide, please. These are some just real basic equipment requirements. And so it's just basically a laptop, terminal node controller, which is essentially a small modem type of piece of equipment, and a good radio. There's a couple notes there, and these notes will be up on the site later. So if you want specifics on anything, just really let me know. I'm more than happy to go back over it. My only real thing here is Associated Radio in Overland Park, Kansas is a great vendor for this type of equipment because you'll need cables as well, and they have custom cables that go out with the TNCs, and so it's a real neat operation. Next slide, and we'll just jump right past this one. This is just a couple of models. The main one that a lot of guys are using is the Cantronics, and then there's a couple members of the club that are using TNCX. We can get into that another time. Next slide. One of the things I really wanted to push, though, is if you're interested in this at all, the winlink.org website has some tremendous information. And if you click over to winlink.org and then their Book of Knowledge link, you'll find videos by Rick Frost, who did an excellent set of tutorials on getting started. It's a 7-part series. It's the one I used, and it's very effective. I know dozens of guys personally, and I know every time I see it come up on Facebook, that's the first thing they always recommend. Also, San Diego Eras has a incredible series as well, and Rob K6RIF is one of the guys that I worked with down at San Diego 100. These guys really put some time into it. Anything you want to know about WinLink, you can go there, and the San Diego Eras group has it covered. Next slide, please. The HF modes has 4 different versions of them. This is just kind of the upside of WinMore, RDOP, Vera, and PAC-TOR. Based on speed, I think almost everybody these days is really mostly looking at the Vera HF. It's a really nice option that's being highly developed. So if you're interested in the HF mode, don't worry about a whole lot of things. Just kind of focus on the Vera HF. It's a very functional mode. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of challenges that can come into play. In VHF, really get out to about 40 miles effectively, and then there's some challenges that come into play. And so physical obstructions can be real problematic. Down in San Diego, we really encountered a situation where I was on the wrong side of a mountain, quite literally, where our elevation was at 4,000 feet, and I was only 20 miles from a gateway, but I had a 9,000-foot ridge line in between me and the gateways, and so needless to say, it was not the most successful initial operation. Next slide, please. The HF modes can be a little bit more challenging, but they can also be a lot of fun. I regularly check in on a couple different nets in HF modes throughout the Western United States. And I know Craig and some of the others really enjoy stretching out too. And it's really fun. And the buddy pole system that's on the table tonight is the main antenna system that I use. And like I said, I've up and down the Western United States into the Rockies and down into Texas pretty regularly, northern Mexico, southern Baja. Those are all stations that I've been able to reach with the buddy pole system. And it's a great option where you don't have access to VHF. Next slide, please. There's a couple of other means of connection where you don't use a TNC, using different sound cards. I'm mostly just throwing this out here because it is stuff that you'll see in the literature as you're studying WinLink and these different things. These are fine for stationary locations at home. It's not stuff I'd take out into the field right now, especially in a group setting. the group settings like Western States and with Placer County areas, you want to really be focusing your system exactly the way that the managers are setting it up. And these systems, while they're functional, they do have some challenges. And if you're trying to deploy them in a group, it just isn't going to work too well. So they're out there, they're fun to play with, but certainly not for somebody just getting started. Next slide, please. Here's a couple other things that are kind of fun. If you're into Raspberry Pi, there's a gentleman named Jason Olam, KM4ACK, and he's got a project called Build a Pi. Some of you may have heard about it already. Lots of things there that are a lot of fun. So you can check out his project or get a hold of me. His Pi is something that I use all the time, and it has a number of features that are just excellent it offers some things that are unique to his program that aren't available in other areas. The Northern California WinLink net is something that I'm involved with. I'm one of the net control operators for it. So go ahead and send me a note. I'll be more than happy to send you some information. It's a great way to practice. And then again, as I mentioned, the WinLink programs group is a great resource as well. Next slide, please. I've already run long, so I'll just close real quickly by saying a real special thanks to Joe Steinmetz, K6 SAT. Joe recruited me into WinLink in 2018, and it's just been instrumental at every step of the way as I've kind of progressed through this thing. It's not a hard learning curve, and Joe has just been absolutely tremendous in being a great resource, and he's been my personal Elmer in a lot of this stuff. Also want to thank Era's KM6 TVV that's with us this evening. He's really been a real help in some of the testing that I've been doing at a personal site that I've got here at home. So thanks a bunch. Really appreciate it. Sorry for going a little long, but I'll close with that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. Appreciate the overview. And anybody have any quick questions for Ken before we go on to the next agenda item? Okay, hearing none. Thanks again, and we'll during the break, of course, you can ask Ken any questions that may come to mind afterwards.